But he said to let the church know that he misses all of us, he loves all of us, and they're looking forward to being back soon. I think he's coming home Sunday or Monday 1. So we'll have Walter Terrell speaking Sunday, and Jonathan should be back Wednesday night. As far as prayer requests go, I notice we're still missing quite a few. We need to remember Johnny and Darlene. Need to remember Elka. I just talked to Kevin, and he's got an appointment tomorrow. So he's having some more problems with his hand and his arm, and maybe a couple other things going on with Kevin. So remember Kevin. Do we have any other requests tonight? Okay, unspoken. If we don't have anything else, I'll ask Nancy to open up our service. Amen. Well, tonight we're going to talk about being in the minority. Sometimes it's good to be in the minority. You know, in our society, we talk a lot about the majority. You know, we decide things by a majority vote. If you run a business, you try to cater your goods and services to what's going to sell the most because you want to have a good business, so you try to cater to the majority. If you run a restaurant, you want to try to have meals that the majority of people are going to like. So our society puts a lot of emphasis on the majority, but in the Bible, we're going to learn that in God's viewpoint, sometimes it's better to be in the minority. So we're going to look at several different scenarios tonight, several different examples. And the first one is going to be Noah and the ark. Now we have quite a few verses tonight. I'm not going to try to put them all on the board, so we're just going to let you know what they are and you can follow along. Good to see Johnny and Darlene. That was one of our prayers that we prayed about. It's good to see them. So we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 6. We're going to begin with verse 5. And we're going to skip around, but we're going to look at quite a few verses in the book of Genesis. And verse 5 of chapter 6 says, "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord." So this tells us here that God looked around and God said, you know, it's bad. Everything is just bad. And Noah and his family was apparently the only godly people that God could find. So we know that Noah and his family would have been in the minority. In verse 12, it says, "And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. And this is the fashion which thou shalt make of it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. And if you wonder, in our language, that's 450 feet long. It's pretty big. 75 feet wide and 45 feet high. And I know some of you have been to see the Ark exhibit there in Kentucky. My family went last year sometime. I know Johnny Webster's been, and I think Randy might even be headed up that way now. So that's a tremendous piece of structure. I mean, it's big. A window shalt thou make to the ark, and in it a cubit shalt thou finish it above, and the door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof, with lower, second, and third stories shalt thou make it. And behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life, from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee, and of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female. Of fowls after their kind, and of cattle after their kind, of every creeping thing of the earth after his kind, 2 of every sort shall come in unto thee to keep them alive. And take thou unto thee of all food that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be for food for thee and for them. Thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him, so did he. So, the first point I would like to make is in chapter 6, verse 5, God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now, we like to blame our modern society for a lot of our problems. You know, we blame things on technology, the internet, TV, sports, all these bad influences. Well, they didn't have any of that back then. They didn't have pornography as we know it. They didn't have TV shows that gave the wrong message. But what they did have was their imagination. The imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So this tells us that sin is a heart problem. I mean, you can be somewhere by yourself with nobody around you, and if you're thinking the wrong kind of thoughts, then you can be sinful. And this is what was going on. And God, he spared Noah and his family, but we know that Noah would have probably been ridiculed when he was building that ark, don't you think? Because up until this time, it had never rained like we know rain. The earth was watered by a mist that came from below the surface. So, can you see the folks sitting around at their dinner table maybe saying, what's Noah doing? I mean, he's crazy. I mean, he's building an ark? What for? You know, he says it's going to rain. What's rain? You know, the only thing we know about water is that it comes up from the earth and waters everything. But he spends all his time out there building that ark. So he was probably ridiculed for that. So I think we can safely say that Noah was in the minority, him and his family. But when it started raining, he was glad that he was in the minority. Only he and his family and the animals that were on the ark, they were the only ones saved. Everything else was wiped out. So in the case of Noah, it would have been good to have been in the minority. The next thing we have, next set of verses I want to look at, and the next example. Do you remember the 12 spies in Numbers? Numbers chapter 13. We're going to spend some time there, so if you would like to flip there, you can. This would have been the children of Israel getting ready to enter into the promised land. So God had freed them from Egyptian bondage. He had brought them through the Red Sea. He had took care of them there in the wilderness. He fed them with manna. He guided them. He did everything for them. And the ultimate goal was for them to enter into the promised land. So they were getting close. In Numbers chapter 13, verse 1, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Send thou men, that they may search the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel. Of every tribe of their fathers shall you send a man, every one a ruler among them." So they sent 12 spies to search out the land. That would have been one representative from each tribe of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel. Each one of them would have had a representative. And notice verse 2, God had already said, "I give you this land." In other words, it was a done deal. It was yours. It's yours. Now, it's time for you to go possess it. So verse 17, well, if you want to look down through the first verses there in Numbers, it's going to tell you the names of all those men. And I won't go through all of them. But we know that Joshua and Caleb are the two that stand out. So moving on down to verse 17. "And Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said unto them, Get you up this way southward, and go up into the mountain, and see the land what it is, and the people that dwelleth therein, whether they be strong or weak, few or many." So notice the report that was given in verse 27. This is the report of the 12 spies. "And they told him and said, We come into the land whither thou sentest us, and surely it floweth with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled and very great, and moreover we saw the children of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast of Jordan. And Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it." So there were 12 spies that went forward to analyze the land. 10 of them brought back a bad report. 10 of them said, "I don't know about this. There's giants over there. There's all these armies and these walled cities, and we're scared. We don't think we can do it." And God had already told them that it was theirs. So they were supposed to go in and possess the land. But they got the people upset. The people began to believe the bad report that these 10 of the 12 brought back. Only Caleb, and we'll learn in a few more verses, Joshua, they were the only two that were in the will of God. And they were the two that said, God's given this to us. We can do this. So verse 30, "And Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men that went up with him said, We be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone to search is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants. And we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. They were intimidated. And their main problem was they didn't trust God. God had told them that I'll take care of these things. You just go possess the land. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to do what God tells us to do and let him work out the details. So, moving on to chapter 14, Joshua and Caleb try to reason with the people. In verse 6 of chapter 14, and Joshua the son of Nun, and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were of them that searched the land, rent their clothes. And they spake unto all the company of the children of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to search it is an exceeding good land. If the Lord delight in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which floweth with milk and honey. Only rebel not ye against the Lord, neither fear ye the people of the land. For they are bread for us, their defense is departed from them, and the Lord is with us, fear them not. So Joshua and Caleb, they were the only 2 out of 12 that were on the right track. They had the right attitude. They were basically saying, God's going to take care of us. We just need to go in and possess the land. But notice the reaction in verse 10. But all the congregation bade stone them with stones. They wanted to stone them. And the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of the congregation before all the children of Israel. And we're going to see that God was not happy with these 10 that refused to go in and possess the land. In verse 36, and the men which Moses sent to search the land, who returned and made all the congregation to murmur against him by bringing up a slander upon the land, even those men that did bring up the evil report upon the land, they died by the plague before the Lord. So God was unhappy enough with this that 10 of the 12 died. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were of the men that went to search the land, lived still. So don't you think Joshua and Caleb would have probably been happy that they were in the minority? They were the only 2 that survived out of the 12. So the point of all this is that if we have God on our side, it's okay to be in the minority. The world that we live in, many times they are anti-God. They're against God. So we don't want to be in the minority just for the sake of being in the minority. But if we're in the minority because we're doing God's will, then it's going to work out for us. So the last one I have is a very familiar story. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's going to be found in chapter 3 of Daniel. They stood up for their convictions. They were definitely in the minority. They were outnumbered. The verse 1 says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits, and he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So he made this giant image. of gold, 90 feet high. That'd be hard to miss, wouldn't it? 90 feet high, 9 feet wide. So this was not something that could be easily ignored. In verse 4, then an herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up." He said, I want everybody to fall down and worship this image. That was a problem for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because they knew that that was not what God said. God said, you don't worship anybody but me. You know, that's just an idol. You don't fall down and worship an idol. So we're going to find out that that's going to upset the king. In verse 6, he said, "Whosoever falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast in the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Therefore at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up." So everybody was doing it except the 3 Hebrew children. You don't have to do something just because everybody else is doing it. That's not a very valid reason for doing something. I know when I was growing up, it didn't work for me. When I would say, well, everybody else is doing it. So-and-so's going here or whatever, why can't I go? Well, you're not everybody else. Or everybody else is buying so-and-so, why can't I buy that too? Well, probably not everybody else is doing it, first of all. And even if they are, that's not a valid reason for doing something. So they stood their ground. And it became apparent that they were not bowing down. And there was some tattletales in the crowd. Verse 8 says, "Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews." Oh, they're going to tell on them. "There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee." In other words, they're not paying any attention to your order. "They served not thy gods, nor worshiped the golden image which thou hast set up." They were in the minority. They were the only ones that were not worshiping this idol. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if it not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up." Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was under normal circumstances. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. They had enough conviction that they were willing to die if that's what it meant. But we know that God had another plan. Verse 24, then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and rose up in haste and spake and said unto his counselors, did we not cast three men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, true, O king. He answered and said, lo, I see four men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the fourth of the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. And the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their heads singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So we can see that their willingness to stand for the truth, even though they were in the minority, it worked out for them. God used this as a great example and a testimony. It sounds like even the king may have become a believer because of this. And it tells us that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were promoted. So it was good for them to be in the minority. There are many scriptures in the New Testament about being in the minority. It's a scary verse in a way, but it's true. It's just, Jesus said it, so we have to take it for the truth. In Matthew 7:14, he says, because straight is the gate, and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. That tells us that most people are not concerned about spiritual things. We get busy and we're concerned about a lot of other things, but it says that the majority of people are not going to find the way to eternal life. So there again, it's good to be in the minority. So what do all these situations that we've looked at have in common? They were all in the minority, but they were all in the will of God. And that's the key. That's what makes the difference. It's okay to be in the minority if God is on your side. And the last verse that I'd like to share with you tonight is Romans 8:31. If God be for us, who can be against us? So if you feel outnumbered or you feel like you are in the minority, as long as you're in the will of God, you're on the right track. Anybody have any questions or comments tonight?